Needless to say, the Holy Land was also a meeting place for artists during the Crusades. There are many examples of works created within this peculiar circle, but in this paper, I would like to focus on a specific painting technique that involves gold. So maybe the next one. Oh, okay. So it employs a unique method of burnishing leaf gold. As a result, gold ornaments, typically circular in shape, become visible on smooth, solid gold surfaces. I haven't not encountered them in too many artworks, so I assume it was a rather complicated technique. It certainly required a relatively thick gold leaf, which increased its cost, and a special polishing tool. A certain amount of skill was also needed to exploit this tool. Too little pressure would make the gold ornaments undetectable, while too much pressure could easily damage the precious gold layer. However, a relatively small number of artworks suggest that only some artists have fully mastered this craft. And in my opinion, Byzantine painters were the masters of this technique. And I also believe it was invented in their milieu, maybe even in Constantinople itself. What is more significant is that most paintings decorated with this technique are Byzantine in origin. Latin ones are really rare. Therefore, I would like to suggest that Byzantine artists invented this specific technique of gold burnishing. But let's return to the paintings themselves, the works in which the mentioned method was applied. They are now treasured in the monastery of Saint Catherine in Sinai. Broadly speaking, their earliest examples dated from the second half of the 10th century, and the latest are from about the end of the 13th century. This group of panel paintings from Sinai is distinguished above all by very characteristic discs, high gloss, polished form, based on the shape of a circle. As I said before, these forms maintain their clarity against gold backgrounds with which they are integrated. It is always the same surface, the same gold surface, and they are typically used as nimbi, mandorlas, rims, and medallions for busts, and sometimes these gold elements can also be part of architectural features. So, Sinai paintings featuring gold whirling discs consist of approximately 120 paintings of varying artistic quality. And this figure is estimated based on my examination of the paintings in Princeton University electronic database of Sinai icons. But I think now let's look at some examples. Here we see the images of Apostle Philip, this one, and Saint Nicholas here. The first is full-length figure, while the second is a bust. In both instances, the remaining surface behind the figure, the background is gilded, and the figures are embellished with shimmering nimbi. They stand out against the background due to a distinctive polishing technique. Furthermore, the painting of St. Nicholas features 10 medallions depicting the Christ and various saints. Narrow borders of these medallions frame these images, polished like nimbi, enhancing their sheen. Probably here it's too bright to see the details, so sorry. Another example of artwork of painting characterized.
Oh, thank you.
So much better. Another example is the Annunciation image, usually dated around 1200 now, and the entire scene is depicted in golden tones with the main exceptions being the water, its fauna, and the Virgin's robe. Undoubtedly, it's the cult that defines the aesthetic expression of this painting. An important role here is played primarily by the visual effects associated with the juxtaposition of matte parts, a strip of ground here, and architecture with a throne of the Virgin, and polished elements, among which we can observe a gradation of this effect. The background presents, let me say, a standard level of gloss. Here you can see, while the nimbi and medallion with a dove of the Holy Spirit, here and here, you can see, they have a high gloss characteristic of this group and of this method. Here and here and here and here you can see, I hope so. As a result, the individual elements of the composition, despite their almost monochromatic nature, retain their expressiveness. Details of the architecture features are painted in dark red, well suited to the golden tone of the whole. A wholly elaborated chrysographic modeling here also distinguish the discussed image of the Annunciation. Gold highlights cover the robe of the Archangel Gabriel, you can see, and we can observe a significant differentiation of shapes made of properly cut and unpolished, in this instance, unpolished gold leaves here. The Sinai icon of the Annunciation is a unique work, not only among other gold paintings in the same monastery, but also generally in Byzantine art. And in this case, the wealth of effects related to combining various gilding and polishing methods in white painting is characterized by a very high level of artistry. And among these golden Sinai panels, the epistles, templon beams, we can say, or iconostasis beams, are particularly compelling, as they clearly demonstrate the changes in the techniques used. The general trend is that the later the work, the more gold ornament were used and the more and fanciful they were. Therefore, it happens that the golden shimmering, actually spinning discs no longer only fulfill the function or nimbi, but cover all available background surfaces. They create an extraordinary aesthetic effect. Gold backgrounds seem to come alive and capture the attention of beholders. They typically feature the composition of daisies in the center, along with the scenes from the cycle of the 12 great feasts. Occasionally, they are enhanced with additional events from the lives of Christ and Virgin, and so on, but they may also depict scenes from the lives of saints, as in this example, you can see. So we can see here the posthumous miracles of Saint Eustratios, and let's look at some examples of these boards. And in this case, the gold discs are quite, let me say, well behaved. They are not very numerous and appears above arcades and of course as nimbi. So here we have nimbi, but also they are here and here and here. So they are quite calm, we can say. Here, another example. In this epistle, the scenes were separated by arcades, and the arches supported on the columns are polished as vigorously as the discs between them. So you can see the arches and the discs between here. There are 4 main ones in each segment. The largest, the middle one, 2 slightly smaller ones to the right and left of it, and an even smaller one at the bottom, close to the arcades. There are also tiny ones next to them on the upper edge of the arch. they are here. They're very numerous in this case. And here, they are in this part. And even more decorative version of the discussed decoration of the fields between the arches of the arcades, separated by individual scenes, is presented in another, slightly later epistle, this one. And the pattern in its basic shape consists of 4 larger circles, the central one composed of 3 elements. So look here, they are here visible. So the central, the pattern is basic shape consists of 4 larger circles. The central one composed of 3 elements, a shiny rim with a larger central circle and 8 smaller ones, filling the narrow space between them. Here, here, and here, the smaller ones, 8 in number. Moreover, triangular surfaces between the arcades are dotted with scattered shiny discs of small dimensions. Therefore, the characteristic polished elements were differentiated in size and repeatedly duplicated, obtaining an exceptionally decorative final effect. The discs here are really wide. So you can find them almost everywhere in these spaces. And the Crusader painters also became, finally we can say, familiar with this technique, as clearly demonstrated by a epistle with 13 feast scenes, which Fulda recently dated to around 1265. These iconostasis beams are also part of the Sinai monastery collection, and this epistle consists of 3 boards. And Weizmann also noted that the size of the beams suggests to him that they were intended for the Frankish chapel at St. Catherine Monastery on Sinai, but according to Fulda, however, it was also meant to be made there, produced there, in a Crusader workshop, but for the church in Damascus. However, for me, it's more important that the Crusader artist decorated a frame and a background with a sparkling disc. They are pretty scattered, so maybe not very easy to observe, to find them, but they are here. And here we have quite many of these golden forms. But it's not easy to capture them in the photo, so that's the problem. The method was also applied into miniature painting by the Italian master of Giovanni da Gaibana epistolary, or better, the master of the Padua epistolary. Giovanni da Gaibana of Padua was a copyist of the second half of the 13th century. His epistolary is considered one of the notable works of an Italo-Byzantine tradition of Gothic illumination in Italy. It was long assumed that Giovanni Gaibana was the illuminator as well, as described of the Padua epistolary. Still, Professor Bellinati has convincingly shown that Gaibana was only the scribe, as evidenced by his later works, which were decorated in an altogether different style. So, here we have one miniature from the epistolary of Giovanni da Gaibana. Another one with Ascension of Christ, and here we can notice, we can observe some elements employing the discussed technique of gold polishing. So not very many, but they are still here. Maybe here you can observe them in a better way. So Let us examine also, very briefly, the so-called Breslau Psalter, which dates from approximately 1255 to 1267. Recent researcher has established that it was produced in the Cistercian Abbey of Lubiąż in Lower Silesia, and the manuscript was commissioned by the Duchess of Breslau, probably. And scholars suggest that around 10 masters painted the miniatures. They divided them into main groups. And the master of Giovanni da Gaibana is associated with only one miniature, the full page Beatus Initial, but recently scholars have tended to attribute to him another illustration, another picture, and this one with Christ surrounded by 11 apostles. However, the most crucial feature of these miniatures is, as in the later case, is the use of particular shining gold element. So they are here, and they are here, and they are here, between these architectural features. And some miniatures from the so-called Breslau Psalters have gold nimbi and backgrounds covered with gold shining rims, and they are polished to such a high gloss that they stand out clearly from the rest of the gilded surface and appear to move. These images are associated with the assistant of the master of Giovanni da Gaibana or with the master of Giovanni da Gaibana himself. And the so-called Gaibanesco style is heavily influenced by Byzantine art, but it also exhibits characteristics of Crusader art. In the works of this circle, we find gold rims scattered across the gold background of miniatures. And he could have learned how to do them based on Byzantine artworks, although, considering the technique's specificity, the best option would be to practice under the supervision of a master. In this instance, the context related to the Crusader is likely the primary focus, although further research is still required. Nevertheless, this gold embellishment suggest that the artistic exchange between the East and West probably also encompassed artistic techniques. So here, another light infrared, this miniature. So to sum up very quickly, maybe the origin of these techniques was in Constantinople, and then we have some artworks on Sinai, Byzantine, but also a Crusaders one, and then some examples in Italy and then in Central Europe. So thank you very much for your kind attention.